everyone, and welcome to Export Development Canada's webinar on exporting to India. I'm Melanie Carter, the moderator for today's session and an account manager at EDC. Before we begin, please note that we're also webcasting today's session using simultaneous French translation. So if you would prefer to listen en français, simply click the français button that's on your screen. Alors, pour notre auditoire francophone, nous offrons une traduction simultanée disponible sur votre écran. Veuillez tout simplement choisir le bouton français. For those of you who are not familiar with Export Development Canada, or EDC, you can think of us as a bank and an insurance company all rolled up into one, completely dedicated to helping Canadian companies grow their business in international markets. We help Canadian companies of all sizes in all sectors to respond to international business opportunities. Part of that support comes from sharing our market knowledge and expertise, which we've gained the hard way. And that's by having worked with more than 7,000 Canadian companies and having had experience in up to 200 markets worldwide. So the purpose of today's webinar is to share some insights on how to navigate successfully on the ground in India. With us today, we have three country experts. First is Raj Narula.
Namaste.
And next is Brad Loisel, President and CEO of SkillStocks. Hi, Brad.
Hello, how are you?
And finally, joining us via teleconferencing, we have our very own EDC's Chief Representative for India, and that's Nathan Nelson. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Melanie. Thanks.
And I'd also like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. We're glad to have you on board. On today's agenda, we'll be discussing, first, how to navigate on the ground in India, and also how to work with agents and partners. And finally, we'll offer tips for success in that market. Finally, for the last 20 minutes, we'll be taking your questions. As many of you already know, this is part 2 of our webinar series on doing business in India. So if you missed the first webinar, don't worry. You can register to view the archived version by going to our website at edc.ca and by selecting the events section. So let's get started. Let's start with Raj. Raj, please start by telling us a little bit about your background and also about your experience in working in India.
Great, thank you, Melanie. I've spent the last 10, 12 years working very closely in the Indian market on mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, as well as bringing Canadian technology companies into the Indian market. So that experience, really started off here in Ottawa by me. I have an engineering degree from University of Ottawa, and I decided to venture into helping companies raise money as well as bring strategic relationships forward. And along the way, I founded a wireless antenna company that actually has ended up selling a lot of product in India to all the telcos, and followed by working with a number of other emerging technologies, and that was what kind of got me interested to go to India. Mm-hmm. In the Indian market, I found that it's an exponentially growing market, with the last 6 or 8 years having 8 to 10% growth. So in essence, when you compile all the different experiences that I've had over the years, I found that the Indian market was a good focus, especially for Canadian technology companies, because we've built some of the best products in the world here.
Right, I agree.
Right here in Ottawa.
I agree. So I'd like to dig a little deeper on that. Please tell us a little bit about what it's like to do business on the ground in India.
So the Indian market is by far probably one of the most difficult to navigate. I'll share an anecdote. Years ago, taking one Ottawa company into India, we successfully did India and then ventured on to Singapore. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting in front of one of the biggest banks, Maybank in Singapore, and the deal manager walked in and he said, when we put our slides up, we actually had 2 Indian companies that we had sold to. He looked at the slide and he said, if you've sold in India, he says, you don't need to tell me anymore. Let's get down to contract discussions.
That was good
because
enough.
They've probably already beat you guys down bad enough. So the Indian market, despite it being very difficult to navigate, can be very lucrative as well.
Right.
So yes doesn't always mean yes. It's one of those things in India where you walk in, you're actually in with corporate heads, and they'll agree to a deal, they'll agree to all the terms, and then you leave the office, you come back, and the next day you've got another email or a call that states, by the way, we need to make some more changes. So for me, it's always been, my views are a deal's not done until you get paid. You have to maintain a constant communication with the folks in India, with whether they're procurement managers or they're decision makers in the company. So it is very, very important for you to communicate effectively as well as understand the nuances of that market, because overall it is a very tough market to navigate. But once you conquer that market, I can tell you can do business anywhere in the world.
It sounds like India is a little bit of a risky market, right? So please tell us a little bit about the steps that a company should be taking to reduce those risks in doing business in India.
Yeah, so that's great. I think from a perspective of understanding, it's like any other market, but India being a bit more specific, you do need to do your homework on that market. The market is actually not a country. It's 22 different countries that you're working with within one single country, because you've got different languages, religions, states, governments, municipal governments, and you're bringing it down from, just as an example, moving a product from one state to another state requires you to fill 20 pages of documents. So you need to have logistics people. I'm talking in general in terms of hardware products or box products. If you're in the software business, it's obviously a little different. But it is important to do your homework on that market. It's also important to find a good strategic partner on the ground. A local partnership on the ground is important to help you succeed in that market. They understand these nuances, they understand how to work around, as well as how to navigate in terms of getting all of this documentation and processes covered off easily. So I find it is important then, as a company, as a North American company, you've got to make sure that as part of your first year of doing business in India, make sure you're ready to do a lot of trips. I've always recommended to the companies I've worked with to plan at least 4 trips in year one. If you can do 6, it's even better, but 4 at least, 1 a quarter. It is important because it keeps you in front of these people. Remember that as a Canadian company, when you're stepping in front of decision makers in India, you're not the only ones they're seeing. They're seeing the Swedes, they're seeing the Germans, the Italians, the French, the Americans, Chinese. I'll give you an example. We were at a telco meeting, and we walked in, and they said, "You guys, only 3 of you showed up?" And we said, "Why is that? Is there a problem?" And he said, No. We're used to the Chinese coming in, and there'll be 15 people.
There's a whole delegation
there's an
coming,
entire delegation walking in.
Yeah.
So in essence, as Canadians, I think one of the challenges we always face is that we need to be raising our flag up more so than not. And I think a lot of the companies, this is one of the things we try to tell people, that we do have that added advantage. India loves Canada, and I think the essence of us having to build those relationships deeper down into that market as Canadians makes it a lot easier. And from ourselves, we found using EDC on the ground in India has been tremendous. The guys are very knowledgeable. They know their customers. They know how to get to them. They know how to get to the decision makers. And then it's up to us, the companies, to actually close the deals.
It's nice to see that India as a whole recognizes Canadian capability, right? You did mention having to travel a whole lot. You plan 4 times a year and so on. Is that specifically true when you're dealing with a client for the very first time? Or is it true, all through your years of negotiating with the one same buyer, for example?
Well, the essence, that's a great question, Melanie. I think, overall, as an in-country strategy, if you're going to go and do business in a market, you actually want to understand how to navigate in that market.
Right.
To understand the people, understand the culture, understand the relationships, understand how important they are to actually win that business. Because at the end of the day, you have a goal in mind. And you've got to set your timelines to say, am I willing to spend a year on the ground? Am I willing to spend 6 months before I start to decide whether or not this market makes sense for me? So I think looking at India for a longer term strategy is a very important task, because it does take some time to get to the right decision makers. It does take time to complete a transaction. If you go into India and think that you made one visit, and we've heard this so many times, companies will show up in India, okay, I'm here, how come I didn't get a PO on this trip? And you're saying, guys, thanks for coming to India. Plan to be here again in a couple of months, because the people you're working with on the other side of the table need to get to know you. They want to know whether you're going to be around, a month from now, 2 months from now. So for me personally, I've probably done 100 trips to India in the last 8-9 years.
Wow.
So it's a fairly large number of trips, but that involves setting up
multiple companies as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I set up my own company in India,
Yeah.
which we grew to about 160 people on the ground in India, and I recently exited.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you have to be there. You want to create the relationships. The Indians want to get to know us, but also you mentioned partners. Partnering with someone in the market is often a good way to go about it. So how do you go about finding the right partner for you in India?
So I think that's probably one of the most critical questions of this webinar, and I think it is important for us as Canadians to realize that we're going to do business on the ground. We do have to have the local partners, but we also have to have great knowledge, and to do that in India, nobody ever says no.
Right.
If you go and meet your partner in India and you want to do business with them, or you're contemplating doing business with them, they'll never say to you that we can't get this done. No doesn't exist in their vocabulary.
Okay.
So what that does is it puts the onus back on you to actually then sit back and say, is this company actually capable of delivering for me? The other question a lot of people fail to ask is, do you represent anybody else with a similar product? Because you don't want to become a competitive evaluation for this other company to actually beat you in that market. So you've got to be able to do your homework. You've got to do your due diligence. You've got to understand that the person sitting across from the table is a person you actually want to do business with. So I find that local partner selection is very critical. And I always recommend to people, take your time doing so, because you'll always meet a lot of people that say, we know this person and we know this person. But the honest answer to doing business in India, you want to deal with seasoned execs. You want to deal with people that have been there before, people that have done business with foreign companies, understanding the language barriers, understanding the time zone differences. In India, communication is so critical, but a lot of it happens over the phone or SMS texting. It doesn't happen over email. We get a lot of executives coming to India and they say, I sent an email, I didn't get a response. And you're going, you didn't get a response because most of the times these folks are not sitting at their desks, they're mobile. So you're better to reach them, and they'll answer the phone calls right in the middle of a meeting. So that essence in India is very different from North America.
Absolutely, for sure. Thank you for that insight, Raj. I appreciate it. So let's move on to Brad. So first and foremost, please tell us a little bit about SkillsDocs and about how long you've been exporting to India.
Sure. So SkillsDocs is a company that helps connect education into India. One of the things that we've noticed over the years is emerging markets. The downfall of quick growth is they need to educate people quickly in a lot of different verticals and sectors. So SkillsDocs was built to help facilitate the growth of that education. One of the things that where I come from is I've built many companies over the years. One, we've manufactured in China, so I got to see the emerging markets and that growth and how they struggle with quality education. So decided many years ago, back in 2010, to start focusing on the emerging markets for education. Started building a company, sold that company, which was an online company in 2011. Continued focusing on the emerging markets, specifically narrowing down into India. We went on trade missions to Brazil and China and India. We decided to focus on India because of the language. As we started building our time in India, we started realizing that education is needed across all sectors and all industries. So the focus and what we've been doing in India started back in 2010. One of the things that we started working on within the Indian market was, like Raj said, understanding the culture and the relationships and the different ways of doing businesses and SMS texting. He's so right. I get texts every day from some senior people. I used to email, and now I text a lot more, which is quite surprising. But you learn all these different things. We started going into India in 2010 on the trade missions, like I said. The first meeting I remember when we were sitting in Mumbai and they were talking about what we should be doing in India. They told us right off the bat, if you're here to get a purchase order on your first trip, forget about it. It's not going to happen. You got to be patient. You got to take time. The next trade mission we came back, almost all the people that were in that first trade mission, most of them weren't there the second time. And as we went continue on some of the missions, we realized that they were just weeding out more and more and more people. When we talk about, you made a good point, when we talk about dealing with relationships, a lot of times companies you deal with, they want to make sure you're actually going to come back. There's a group called the National Skills Development Council in Delhi that I met with them the first time, told them what we're doing. He said, oh, this is great, it's very interesting. Every trip I went down, and last year alone I was there 7 times, I made an effort to go see them every single time. And the last time I met with them, the guy actually told me, he goes, okay, I know you're dedicated, I know you're focused on India, you're here all the time. Why do you keep coming seeing me?
Right.
And I said, because our first meeting, you said, you know, you want to see, you get a lot of people that come here and they don't really understand what it takes. And I wanted to prove to you that I understood what it takes. And that's why I'm here. And he goes, okay, what can we do together? So, you know, we took a lot of time on building those type of relationships.
So then what you're saying is that you didn't start selling into India directly in 2010.
No,
The road was a little longer than that.
Yeah, we took 2 years to plan. Normally when I build a company, it takes me about a year to plan out the processes, the culture, the technologies, the team we need, what we need in order to be successful. It took 2 years, and the reason it did is because it's a different country. We had to go back many times, and you know, every time I've gone back, I've learned something new. And I started realizing that, and he nailed it on the head when he talked about, you know, you can meet with somebody, and they'll say they'll do business with you, but they won't. You know, you can follow up many times afterwards, and they won't. So I started realizing that the only way that we'll succeed with these businesses is to build personal relationships. So the first time I met with the Bombay Stock Exchange is a prime example. My very first meeting, at the end of the meeting, I asked if I could take a picture with them. And the CEO of the Institute said, okay, well, sure, and I don't know why you want to do that. And I told him, I said, because in a year from now, when I follow up with you, I want you to remember who I am, because you probably won't remember me from a name. So a year later, when I did follow up with him, I sent him an email with the picture, and I said, this is, I don't know if you remember me. Anyways, he replied back, and he said he was so impressed on how I connected to him at a personal level that he mentioned it in his MBA, to his MBA students about, look at this Canadian, how he's trying to connect on a personal level. I really like this. And ever since then, him and I talk on a regular basis. I have his cell phone, I have his personal email address. Like we've communicated on a different level than most business people. And I've done that with almost every relationship that I've established in India.
I guess that's the case for most relationships, right? I mean, you're trying to build personal relationship with anyone that you meet, but for different markets, it's even more important. And it sounds like India is one of those markets where you need to go, you know, to be one step ahead, basically.
India is absolutely about relationships. It's about trust, confidence, credibility. You know, there's a lot of people that go there that try and sell business first. I realize that they're not like that, and you know, the culture is different. Even when delegations have come to Canada, I've invited people to my house. So I've invited people for dinner to you know, people that from DFATE or you know, different groups in India. And you know, a lot of them have been really appreciative. They've come to my house, met my family. You know, we sat down, had dinner together, and then they go back, and we have now this bond that someone going there just to sell won't have.
Right. So, you know, creating the relationships is definitely a part of how you've been successful. Any other points you'd want to bring up in terms of how you've actually became successful in India?
Well, patience and time. You know, we spent a lot of time there, and Raj said it earlier, was you have to go down there a lot. You know, if you're not there, you're not in their scope of what they're thinking. They'll forget about you. There's a lot of companies that are soliciting these guys, and unless you're there, unless you're genuine and you're really trying to do something to benefit both parties, patience, things don't happen overnight. I got to tell you, setting up a simple thing like a bank account or an incorporation in India, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the photo office and taken my picture and signing over it and sending it back. We must have done that a dozen times by now. It takes a very long time. There's this duplication of documentation that they require. You have to be patient and you have to be committed. You really do.
Right. So any key learnings you'd want to bring forward to the audience today?
Key learnings is you can't expect to go down and sell right off the bat. If you're going to go down and sell, you need to understand how you're going to get paid. You know, one of the things that we came to realize, which is very critical, and a lot of institutions here that I've noticed are trying to sell, they're trying to use, for example, PayPal. Most people in India don't have credit cards. PayPal accepts credit cards, right? So trying to pay with an Indian debit card, they can't accept it. So most large organizations are sitting there going, I'm not getting any sales. It's not that you're not getting sales, people can't buy. So you got to set up your infrastructure to be able to sell to India properly. In order to sell to India, you need to set up an Indian gateway. In order to get an Indian gateway, you have to have an Indian bank account. In order to get an Indian bank account, you have to have an Indian corporation. So to start that process, a year and a half.
Right.
So-
Right. So that's what you said. Do your due diligence, set up properly, take the time, be patient. Those are great key learnings. Thank you. I know that the audience really likes to hear those success stories and those insights from companies who've actually been through it, especially if the audience is just starting to look at the Indian market. So let's move on to Nathan. So Nathan, you've heard our panel members talk about the risks of doing business in India and how it's important to work with various partners to be successful. Please tell us a little bit about what role EDC plays in all of this.
Thanks, Melanie, and just excellent comments so far. Very impressed by both Raj and Brad. So, I mean, as you mentioned, and maybe to think of EDC as kind of a tool to get past some of the challenges that both companies mentioned. And as you said, I mean, our role is really to help Canadian companies grow their business in India. And I like to think of us as the link to the Indian corporates and the companies here in the market. We do this via our various financing relationships with Indian companies. We basically offer financing to Indian companies in order for them to purchase more from Canada. Now, the financing can be direct in support of a specific contract or a project, or it also can be general, whereby India companies can use the funds, use the financing, but they have to agree to work with EDC and our partners in order to grow the business they do with Canada. Now, currently we have these types of facilities with Indian corporates such as Reliance Industries, the Tata Group, Mahindra & Mahindra, Aditya Birla, and Larsen & Toubro, to name a few. And the value for the Indian company is that EDC offers supply chain advice, and we do introductions to new Canadian companies, that might meet their supply needs. So some kind of new Canadian technology or some kind of a new product that Canada has or Canada's very good at, and we provide that type of introduction. So it's really a win-win, both for the Canadian company as well as the Indian corporate. Now, EDC does this hand-in-hand with our federal and provincial partners. So we try to tap the entire Canadian market and make sure that all Canadian companies get the best representation here in the market. So we work closely with the Trade Commissioner Services, for example. We assist with introductions, and we organize in both inbound and outbound trade missions, such as was mentioned earlier. And EDC's value is really to use the financing tools, as a bank, to gain access to the companies and build a trusted partner relationship with them, to be able to get in deep and to be able to make those types of introductions. So basically, we just want to leverage our financing to grow the Canadian business here in the market. In India, I have a 5-person team. Everybody's very dedicated to EDC's products and to grow the Canadian footprint and the exports and investment here in India. Very happy to say that we've had an excellent year in 2014 with over $700 million in new financing facilities, and I see that growing in 2015 as well. We have 2 people in Delhi and 3 people here in Mumbai, and we'd love to assist you. We'd love to help to make some introductions. So if you're a Canadian company and listening in, just let us know when you're coming, and we'd be happy to help you.
That's great, Nathan. It sounds like some Canadian companies might, in fact, be supported indirectly by EDC without their knowledge, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of these facilities that we talk about, I mean, it's interesting because we'll provide the financing to some of these larger corporates, the ones that I've mentioned, and basically the agreement is that we do the introduction and then we open the doors and the Canadian companies, as was mentioned by Brad, I mean, it's up to them to win the business, but we're there to make the introduction and then see how the relationship grows.
Interesting. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Nathan, and everyone for participating. We did begin this session by promising tips on how to do business in India, and I hope you can take some of this information that you've learned today and use it to build your export strategy. So whether you're exporting to India or anywhere else in the world, EDC can help you protect and grow your business. We can protect you against not getting paid, We can provide guarantees to help your bank free up working capital for you. And we can even help you get the performance bonds that you need without tying up your collateral. So if you're exporting or thinking about it, we're here to help. Please give us a call at 1-800-229-0575. Again, that's 1-800-229-0575. Hello, everyone. Today we are here live with our guests and ready to answer as many questions from you as we can. Today joining me by telephone is Brad Loisel. He's currently in San Francisco, and Raj Nirula, who's in Delhi. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Thank you, Melanie.
And unfortunately, Nathan, EDC's chief representative in India, is not able to join us for today's Q&A session. He's actually attending an important event in India currently. So any questions you have for him can be sent in by email, and I will let you know how to do that a little later on. So I will let you know quickly how to go ahead and pose a question. So please click on the Q&A button on the lower left hand of your screen. So let's begin with the very first question. Okay, so let me start with you, Raj. Have you encountered any importation or duty issues in India?
Yeah, Melanie, I think that's a great question to kind of kick off navigating in India. One of the challenges a lot of companies face is documentation. We've seen equipment arrive in India, by one of our partners, and we have specifically indicated what should be on the documentation and what should not be on the documentation. It's not about hiding information. It's about clarity of information that coincides with shipping documents or with manuals that are shipped with the product. So, for example, if you're sending product ABC XYZ, your documentation should state product ABC XYZ, and it should not say ABC YZ. Sometimes the customs folks are extremely determined to check everything that they have to, and in that situation, you'll find yourself in having your shipment delayed, and the minute it gets delayed, you're talking at least 2 weeks before you get it out. So in essence, companies should be really well prepared about ensuring that the documentation that they prepare for any of the materials that come into India. The second part of that is to ensure that if there are approvals required, for example, for telecom equipment, you have certain equipment that's transmitting and receiving requires a Type E approval in India, and for that you have to apply in advance. So in essence, these are the things that companies should be concerned about. On software products, typically there are no challenges because for software issues, you're basically drop shipping software, either software as a service or your on-premise installations. However, there is still documentation required to ensure that the customer has fully received that.
Thank you so much. Brad, did you ever encounter any of those problems? And if not, how did you actually make sure that you didn't encounter those problems?
Well, our business is online, so we don't have physical products to go over there. But when Raj mentioned the forms or the documentation, he's absolutely correct with that. Just my experience with all the institutions that we've had to work with, banks and lawyers and things like that. Your documentation has to be completely accurate. I'll give you a quick example. In Ontario, sometimes we write ON as the abbreviation for Ontario. When we send in documentations, if some of our documents say Ontario and others say ON, they've been rejected and sent back to us. So the details are very, very important.
Thank you so much for bringing that forward. That's a good note to take for anyone filling out those forms. So the next question is, someone asks, what is your experience in being well informed in terms of all the missions and trade shows and everything else that may be specific to India? Any experience, Raj?
Yeah, on that front, I think the Trade Commissioner Service, is a great place to start. And what you find is that they're so well informed about all the different events that are taking place in the various cities. And it's always good to stay in touch with, the vertical specialists. So each of the 8 embassies and missions or high commissions and consulates in India actually have specialists in different areas. So it's good to be able to find out who is your vertical specialist in this specific city and connect with them early enough, before when you start to investigate coming to India. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, they'll also tell you specific events that may be, of value to you as a company for your products, your solutions. So that's a great way to go. And then another one is, you do have similar services in Canada, and they typically have good links. So Ontario, Alberta, all of the provinces have their own reps in India as well. So, they're all great connectors in terms of being able to tell you what's relevant for you.
Yeah.
Brad?
And Brad, are you a member of an organization that also provides you with some insights as to what's coming in terms of missions in specific countries? Of course, this one is specific to India.
Yeah, I've always tapped into the trade commission services. When I first started going to India back in 2010, we tapped into that right away, because going into a country where it's foreign to us, it's a massive country, and unless you have people there to guide you and help you figure out what are the appropriate meetings to set up or people to deal with, you'll fall down. So we went on trade missions repeatedly, trade shows. We were brought into some of the largest meetings with our largest companies, with senior people across all of India. So it was a fantastic way to get started. And even today, I'm still very close with DCD and the Ontario government, and I always send them updates of what we're doing, and I get responses about hey, here's an event that could be good for you. I've been asked to speak on behalf of DCD in different cities representing Canada. So if you stay connected with these individuals, they open a lot of doors.
Excellent. Thank you for those insights.
Melanie, I'd like to also add, ITAC is a great source for India. They've been running missions annually, and, their annual mission has brought in 8 to 10 companies each year. And the quality of meetings that are established, it's a week-long mission. And the good part is that the companies qualify to get some funding as well. So, you're actually getting government support. So it's EDC, the Trade Commissioner Service, Ontario government, as well as ITAC, and ITAC's a great organization for that.
So mention it again, you say ITAC, and is that an acronym?
Yeah, the IT Association of Canada. They're Toronto-based, and they're a global national organization. A lot of the large enterprises in Canada are members, as well as a lot of smaller companies, and the membership's pretty reasonable to be part of as a young company, and it's great value.
Thank you for mentioning that and for clarifying what ITAC is. I'm sure that there are many associations, depending on the industry that you're part of, that would be able to help as well. As an example, for the manufacturers or the Exporters and Manufacturers of Canada, which is one association that I know, and there are certainly multiple others that would, in fact, state dates of missions or events specific to markets or industries. So, on to the next question. So somebody's asking about corruption in India, specifically in the public domain. So, it's something that we hear about, quite a bit in specific markets in India as well. What has been your experience with respect to this, and how have you been able to make sure that you weren't part of any corruption in India? Raj, I'll start with you.
Sure. Emerging markets always bring lots of different, I would call, experiences to the table. As companies, as North American companies or any global companies coming to the Indian market, you do have to ensure that you're always alert in terms of what are some of those nuances. One of those nuances is agents who, get involved on the ground. If you are going to involve agents on the ground, ensure that you do your own due diligence to ensure that these folks, are running a good operation. They've got credibility. They've actually got clients that you can reference back and forth to ensure that you're not, being led into a situation that could, hurt you in the long run. And the most important point is, if you are a new company coming into the Indian market, chances are you want to try to start at the public sector, and you'll find it's a lot easier to navigate. And in my 9 years on the ground in India, I've never encountered any issues, and we've solely stayed on the private side. So in essence, I believe that's one of the advice that we can give you from our end.
So Brad, how did you start in India? Did you start with the public sector, or was it the private?
No, I started with the private as well. Government could sometimes always be challenging. It's challenging here. It's challenging in other countries. So we decided that we were going to focus on private. And, the advantages of the Trade Commission Service, going back to that, during our initial meeting, they went through all this with us. They talked about what we need to be careful of. They talked about how to maneuver and where we need to be focused. Everything you really need to know to de-risk what you're trying to accomplish in India. So we did spend a lot of time doing due diligence. And in my experience, in the last 5 years being there, I've never run into corruption at all. Not once. Not one meeting, not one partner I met with. So I'm sure there is a lot of corruption up in the government areas or anywhere really. But it's how you are within those meetings and those presentations and when you're dealing with people. If they see that you're not that type of person, they won't even try.
So it's important to be in touch with the right people. How do you make sure that you actually get connected to the right folks in India? How do you do the matchmaking? How do you make those connections, Brad?
Well, that's where the government comes in really handy. We went on multiple trade missions in the early years. Today,
do you mean our own government?
Our own Canadian government, yeah. So the Canadian government that has relationships in India. So the trade commissioners that represent the Canadian interests. So when we go down, we went down with the Ontario government group. I went down with many people from DFAD's group. And so while we were down there, they were setting up meetings with us. We were in essence part of a Canadian tour, a Canadian mission, and it's with those people that they provide you with the right insights. And like Raj mentioned earlier, you go down and you ask them, this is our business, this is what we're trying to accomplish. These are the people we would like to be set up with, or the type of, not the companies, but the type of business. And they'll go through their Rolodexes and say, okay, you know what? Here's 10 companies that we're going to introduce you to on this trade. They're all reputable, they're all high, and that's when you start building your relationships. So over the last 5 years, we've built hundreds of relationships with a lot of really reputable companies that all started from working with the Canadian government in India.
Thank you for that insight. Raj, is there anything you wanted to add to that? About how to make connections?
No, I think Brad said it well.
Excellent. I'll just mention, one of the questions here was probably more oriented to Nathan, so I'll speak on his behalf a little bit on how EDC helps to make those connections. And EDC has representation in about 20 countries internationally, one of them being in India. So we work in very close relationship with the trade commissioners, of course, and we too have lots of contacts and a large network of people that we can help Canadian businesses be introduced to, whether it be partners like banks and large companies that are willing to buy from Canada. And further than that, EDC helps to, I guess, further exports from Canada by offering large financing deals to large buyers internationally, some of them being in India. So by EDC offering financing to these large companies, they're basically saying, well, we'll be using this financing provided by EDC to buy directly from Canada. So because we have these relationships with these large buyers, because of the financing that we've offered, we can leverage those relationships and introduce Canadian companies that have the right capabilities to those buyers. So there are multiple ways where a Canadian company can actually be introduced to the right parties in specific markets.
Yeah, just to go on what you said there.
Yes.
We started recently working with EDC as well, and John from your team has been very helpful. He's introduced us to some major banks, and we've gone in and met with them and started building great relationships with them. So Canada has all these great resources that help us tap into different areas of business within India.
Right. Right. So definitely have a look on your organizations. If you're a member of an organization, have a look on their website, on the trade commissioners' websites, on EDC's websites. There are lists of tons of information that you can have access to help you through. And of course, there's usually a phone number that you can call to speak with someone directly who would be always more than happy to help you out for sure. So I'll go on to the next question. So gentlemen, it's a long one, so keep your ears open. So it says here, while India has a good set of laws, how does a Canadian company deal with the fact that there are no rule of law in India? In other words, because there are millions of outstanding cases, if anything ever goes wrong legally, there's no way to resolve it in practical terms, or at least not one that is known of. How does a company navigate through that without losing their shirts in 5 minutes? So is there anything you can bring forward with respect to that?
Do you want me to take this, Raj, to start? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So my experience, and I think this is just in business in general, is if companies go down there expecting to sign a contract right away, then there's a good chance they're going to run into some problems. Business anywhere, and especially in India, is based on a relationship. And I mentioned this before when I did this session. It's important that when you go down there, your frame of mind is we need to understand the people we're working with, because once you start building those relationships, they start to understand you a lot more, and they become more of a partner than just a signed contract person. And it's important that once you build those relationships, if you run into issues, you're able to talk it through, and that's the critical part. Because if you jump right to legal, or they decide they're not going to pay you for whatever reason, then there's fundamentally a problem with the relationship. So, in our business, we've spent probably about 2 years just doing research and just building relationships before we even signed our first deal. We spent a lot of time. I've gone to houses of some of the CEOs, met their parents and their kids, and spent that time so that our relationship is strong. So anything goes wrong, any challenge, we address it. It doesn't get to the legal part. So my advice is, if you go down there and you want to do business, don't try doing business just trying to get the deal. Do business based on a relationship level. And I don't think you'll run into issues down the road.
So
Raj?
I'll add to that, Melanie,
Yeah.
and I think Brad's covered a good part of the relationship and doing business, and that's really, really important. Adding to that, I think one of the challenges in India on the rules and regulation part, you have to understand that you've got multiple states. Each state in India runs independently. So let me give you an example. If you have to ship a product, and let's say it's a server, a box, it's a piece of hardware. It could be anything. And you have to ship it from Delhi by truck to, let's say, Chennai, which is, crossing about 8 states. Well, guess what? You're going to need to do a set of documentation that essentially allows you to clear every border that truck crosses. So, you're not building one set of documents, you're building a whole set of documents. So I'm giving you an idea that, in that country, and it's to Brad's point, you have to do your due diligence if you're going to be doing products on the ground. If you're in the manufacturing side, you need to look at the rules and regulation of where you're going to set up and understand the environment you're in, what approvals you need to have, you would do in Canada. And lastly, I think, to wrap it up on this part, important to understand that you're dealing with multiple languages in India as well. So, from an IP perspective, I have to admit, though, that the laws in India are fairly strong, and IP protection is fairly good. So you're in no different territory than you are in a country like Canada or North America. On one of the companies that we had in India, we had a patent issue. And we were able to get it to the Supreme Court fairly quickly, and in fact won our position. And the company that we locked out of the market happened to be a Chinese company, and they were restricted from doing business in India, going forward on that product. So it is, the laws are pretty stringent, and they're pretty favorable if you have done your homework right. And in our case, what helped us was we had actually protected the patent in India. So, that was a major coup for us.
All right. Thank you for clarifying on that. I'll just remind the audience that Brad and Raj have lots of insights to share. They both have lots of experience in India, so please don't be shy. If you have any questions, please press the Q&A button on your screen and send us a question. The next question is this. Once a product has been delivered to India, are there any unique challenges associated with temporary export of the product for the purpose of service or repair? So Raj, you may have a little bit more experience with respect to that, given that it's goods that we're talking about here.
Yeah, sorry, could you just repeat that? I had lost a couple of words.
Of course.
The connection was a little weak.
Absolutely. So once a product has been delivered to India, are there any unique challenges that are associated with temporary export of the product for the purpose of service or repair?
Right. No challenges at all. I think, there are enough RMA facilities, they call them the returned goods perspective, and you can actually find partners in India that, if you're selling hardware and equipment, you can find sufficient partners in India to support repairs, repair and return. And in other words, and for software companies, it's generally not a challenge. And for software companies, the advice is very quickly, if you're going to be selling your service or product or solution in India, ensure that you've got some people trained on the ground in India so they're working in the time zone, or ensure that you have the service available back home in Ottawa or in Canada, anywhere, wherever you're located, to service the time zone that you're going to be selling into. So up to now, we've never encountered any issues on returning products and having them brought back in after repair.
Thank you. We had a great question yesterday, and I would love to have your perspective on it, Brad. Somebody yesterday was asking about whether it was important, in your view, to have to set up shop in India to be successful in India. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, hands down. You absolutely have to have presence in India. Our experience with doing business in India, and I'll take recent experiences. We're working on a pretty big deal, which will be disclosed or released next week, that everybody will hear about. We were doing conference calls, and things kept getting lost, and context wasn't being captured, and it was hard to get their expression, so I couldn't read their body language on were they receptive to what I was saying. So I canceled the meeting and said, listen, I'm going to fly down to India. I'm going to come down. I'm going to sit down with you, and we'll have the face-to-face. And when I came down, the general manager that I met with said, Brad, that was the best thing you could have done because we were struggling on this end. So, having an office down there and having people down there that can represent your interests, or going there often. I've been there nine times this last year. Going there often to meet with people face-to-face, it's the way business needs to be done there. Again, you're building relationships, and it's hard to build a relationship over a phone when you don't see face-to-face, and you're not going out to dinner, and you're not doing those type of things, because business happens even when you're not at the office. So it's very, very important that you work hand in hand with people down there, or you have somebody representing you.
Thank you very much for clarifying on that. That's much appreciated. Question about VAT, so value-added tax. What are those taxes like in India? State taxes, are there state taxes to watch out for? Can you be a non-resident importer, or is incorporation required? So any information or insights you have to share with respect to taxes and being a resident or not, and how that has an impact? So I'll start with you, Brad.
From our perspective, we don't face the taxes that most people face. Our business is online education.
Right.
So we're faced with the corporate tax, which is quite high. But that's pretty much it. We haven't been faced any goods and services and things like that because of our type of business. So right. I don't necessarily have that experience. Raj could probably tell you a little more about that.
Please go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, so thanks, Brad. I think, part of the software solutions or equipment that's sold in India, for example, if you're selling it from Canada, if it's a service that you're selling into India, there's generally what they call a service tax that's added. Now, each of the verticals is different, so, the best advice I can give you is, yes, you will encounter service taxes and value-add taxes. And in certain products, they're applicable, and in certain products, they're not. What we found is in the services business, there was what they call a service tax, which is typically in the 11 to 13%. The other thing to be concerned about is what they call withholding tax. And the withholding tax is a real tricky one because, Canada and India have a dual treaty. And so you'll encounter that, anywhere from 12 to 30% of your money that is to be transmitted to you for the service you've provided or the product you've sold can be withheld on the India side. And, that is all dependent on the tax brackets and some of the adjustments that take place. So do your homework on that front. Ensure that the partner you work with on the ground is aware of those service tax, withholding taxes, because they can be, a big surprise for you. And most of the companies that, I've worked with have all been briefed fairly well in advance, so the pricing structure is reflecting that particular part, so that we don't end up leaving money on the table. Now, if you are a company in Canada that is profitable and you've got to pay taxes, well then guess what? You do have the luxury of bringing that money back as a tax credit on this side because of the dual treaty. But that requires a lot of accounting and a lot of help on both sides. So keep that in mind, and that's probably the most important part of the tax perspective to be concerned about.
Thank you. So this next question may be a little bit related to the question about setting up shop in India. But basically, the company here is asking how to go about foreign direct investment in India, how to be successful, and what to possibly watch out for. So, Raj, do you want to speak to this first?
Again, I missed your...
Yes. So
it broke up on me again.
How to be successful, or what to watch out for as you go about foreign direct investment in India. So investing large sums, I'm assuming, into acquiring or merging with having a merger with a company in India, or basically setting up a greenfield in India, maybe. I'm assuming is what they're talking about here. So how to be successful and possibly what to watch out for as you're going about this.
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, the credibility of your company that you're doing business with on the other side is really important. So my advice to any company is, again, use the Canadian Trade Commissioner Services, the EDC folks, the provincial reps to help you navigate the validity of your partner on the other side. You will find on the India market that, you'll have a lot of companies that may turn around and sound like they're very large, but when you actually dig a little bit deeper or dig down one layer, you find that, they lack revenue or they lack the infrastructure that they claim they have. So it is important, and again, this is anywhere in the world, and it's not reflective of India. However, it is important for you to do the due diligence to understand who is the partner you're dealing with, and ensure that you're using, in banking, global banking to do your transactions so that, you have protection built in, whether it's milestone-based, whether it's a statement of work-based, whether it's rules-based, but do ensure that you have some qualifications on the transfer of your money and make sure that a lot of the times it's done in installments versus, one big lump coming in. If you're doing a $10 million deal, you make sure that you start with a smaller piece so that you have protection to see that, all of the rules have been met and all of the regulations have been dealt with, and that you have the right accounting firms on the two ends or legal firms managing your transactional paperwork. So I think, from that perspective, these are very critical for doing business in India.
Brad, did you want to add anything to Raj's response?
Yeah, it was a good response, Raj. I think from a perspective of going in there, doing your due diligence and having the right professional services around you. So we again, using the Trade Commissioner Services, asked them, which lawyers should we be dealing with. When we set up our company in India, it was a very long process. Working with the banks and all that kind of stuff required a lot of paperwork and a lot of effort. But having the proper professional services there to help us, people that were recommended and that were pre-qualified, I guess you could say, by our Canadian government, really helped us in the confidence that we had with what we were setting up. So I would recommend if someone's going to look at investing in India, no matter what it is, get a good lawyer in India, get a good accountant, and work closely with them to make sure that due diligence is properly done. The other thing that the trade services also do is when we were doing some business in Hyderabad, and we were looking at a particular company, we sent them the company's details, and they went and did background checks on the company and came back to us and said, yeah, you know what, we've done checks on them. They look like a fairly reputable company. There's no issues. So taking advantage of those type of things as well helps. Doing all that due diligence helps you in advance, for sure.
Super. So we're almost out of time. So maybe I'll leave it to both of you to give a last piece of advice, something that we may not have touched on and something that you think is very relevant. It's something that needs to be said. Is there anything that we missed on, Raj, that you would like to point out at this point?
Yeah, I think there's one element, and again, it's a very important one that I've learned over all the years. I've done M&As in India. I've done joint ventures. I've brought companies to India. We've exited in India. We've kind of hit, I would say, a number of transactions in India. So in that respect, my key advice to any company wanting to come into India is to ensure that you have a management team that's totally on site. So, if you're 4 people on your management team or you're 5 on your board, make sure that you have sufficient governance in place that ensures that you have a green light to navigate in India. And we've heard it from Brad during the webinar, the number of trips he's made to India. So India is not a country you expect to come in and do business in 1 trip, 2 trips, 3 trips. Mm-hmm. Be prepared to make 4 to 6 trips in year 1. So, to do that, you want to have a management team that says, look, we've got the funds. Yes, we're going to go after this market. And I can assure you of one thing. It's a great market for a lot of Canadian software, hardware, manufacturing companies, product companies, because, we do have, in my opinion, the best of breed products in Canada, and we should not hesitate to, come and look at India for business.
Thank you. Brad, is there anything that has not been said that you would like to point out at this time?
Yeah, I think a very important part for people going into India for the first time is going in with their eyes wide open and having the right expectations. When I first went to India, and I'll be very, very honest here, I was overwhelmed with the different environment, the level of poverty, things like that. It was a culture shock, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. But going in with an open mind and realizing that just because you see poverty, it doesn't mean it's like that behind the buildings that the people you're dealing with, right? So going in with an open mind that if you want to do business in India, go down there to build good business, and don't worry about what you're seeing around, because it is a culture shock. But it's a great place to do business. Food is awesome, and the people are fantastic. Good country to work with.
That's great. I mean, you've been 9 times in the last year, so obviously pretty good. So that is all the time that we have. I'm sorry, go ahead, Raj.
Sorry, Melanie, I was just going to say he's just trying to race with me, that's all. We've got a bet going from last year. So.
Oh, thank you. So that is all the time that we have for today. But if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to email us at marketing@edc.ca. And that's marketing@edc.ca. I'd also like to remind you that you will be able to review today's presentation on our website. So you will be receiving an email soon with a link to access it. A very special thank you to Kevin and Raj for sharing their knowledge of India. And if you'd like to learn more about this or other markets, visit our website at edc.ca. Check out our Knowledge Center, where you'll find a ton of information and resources. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this webinar and for joining us.